Some truths arrive not with grace, but with a growl. They don't knock gently on the door of your understanding. They crash through it, loud, uninvited, and impossible to ignore. I used to believe life was meant to be soft. That kindness was the highest virtue, that if I gave more, loved more, forgave more, somehow the world would meet me in return. But the world doesn't always return what you give. And so I learned. I learned that life is not a poem, but a paradox. That the same heart that forgives endlessly can die from 1,000 tiny wounds. That peace isn't always found in harmony, but in knowing when to walk away. They called them toxic. These lessons I began to live by. They said I had changed, and maybe I had, but what they didn't see was that the old me was dying from politeness, suffocating under the weight of expectations I never agreed to. I began to question the rules I had lived by, the rules that told me to shrink for others to feel tall, to be agreeable even when it meant betraying my own voice, to carry the burden of being nice, even when it crushed my spirit. Was it really goodness? Or was it fear wearing a smile? I thought setting boundaries was selfish, until I realized that sacrifice without consent is not kindness, it's silence, a quiet resignation, a slow erasure of self. Somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't living. I was performing for approval, for belonging, for the illusion of peace that always came at my own expense. And then the lessons began to find me one by one. Lessons no one puts on motivational posters. Lessons you don't hear in polite conversations. But lessons carved into the bones of those who have walked through betrayal, loneliness, and awakening. Don't tell people everything. Protect your energy. Walk away without explanation. They sounded harsh at first, but each one was a thread, unraveling the lies I had been wrapped in. There's a strange clarity that comes when your heart finally breaks, not from someone else, but from your own denial. The realization that the love you keep giving is being used as currency, that the forgiveness you offer is seen as weakness, that your silence is being mistaken for agreement. And so I stopped apologizing for changing. I stopped shrinking to fit into places I had outgrown. I stopped dressing up my pain just to make others more comfortable. The world may call it toxic, but I call it rebirth, because I no longer bleed for people who would not even offer a bandage. I no longer explain myself to those committed to misunderstanding me. I no longer wear suffering like a badge of honor. There is a quiet rebellion in choosing yourself, a subtle strength in saying no without guilt, a deep wisdom in walking away without anger. I learned that boundaries are not walls, they are doors with locks, and not everyone deserves the key. These are the lessons they warned me about, the ones that would make me cold, the ones that would turn me into someone unrecognizable. But I didn't become colder, I became clearer, and in that clarity, I saw something I hadn't seen before. That truth doesn't always come wrapped in comfort. Sometimes it arrives like fire, burning everything false, leaving only what is real. They called these lessons toxic because they didn't look pretty on the surface. But beauty was never the point. Truth was. And sometimes the truth has sharp edges. Still, I held it close. Let it cut. Let it carve new understanding into old wounds. Because when you stop fearing the label of too much, too selfish, or too distant, you finally make room for a life that feels like yours. These are not easy truths. They won't win you popularity. They won't be applauded by those who benefit from your silence, but they will set you free. And in that freedom, you'll begin to see that the most toxic lessons were never poisoned. They were medicine with a bitter taste and a permanent cure. And that's when the next lesson reveals itself, the one that changes everything. Truth, when stripped of its politeness, becomes clarity. And clarity, though uncomfortable, is where real transformation begins. After shedding the skin of who I thought I was supposed to be, I began to see the world not as I wished it to be, but as it truly was. And that was when the lessons arrived, not all at once, but slowly, like raindrops waking a sleeping earth. Each one reshaped my understanding, like chisels carving stone. Lessons people called toxic, but that gave me something I had never felt before: power. Not power over others, but over myself. The first one was simple, yet it shook me. No one is coming to save you. I had waited, quietly, hopefully, for someone to fix me, to rescue me from my own life. But no one ever came. Not because people are cruel, but because they're busy saving themselves. At first, it felt lonely. Then it felt like liberation. Because when I stopped waiting, I started moving. When I stopped blaming, I started building. The moment I took full ownership of my life, even the broken parts, I stepped into a new kind of strength. Another lesson followed, one even harder to accept. Be careful who you suffer for. Some people will let you carry their pain like it's your purpose. They'll cry in your arms and smile in someone else's. They'll drain your energy and call it love. But love without reciprocity is not love, it's consumption. I learned to stop mistaking endurance for loyalty. Just because I could carry someone didn't mean I should. Just because I understood their pain didn't mean I had to live in it with them. And when I finally let go of those who only took, I found room for those who could give. One lesson came to me quietly, like a whisper I had ignored for years. Don't explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. I used to over-explain everything, my intentions, my actions, my choices, hoping to be understood. But some people don't want to understand. They want control. They want submission. They want you to fit into a version of you that serves their comfort. Explaining yourself to someone who only listens to respond is like shouting into a void. So I stopped. I let silence speak for me. I learned that peace isn't always loud. It's often found in the quiet confidence of walking away. Then came the lesson I once thought heartlessly: use people, just don't misuse them. I rejected it at first, believing any form of use was wrong. But slowly, I saw the truth hidden beneath the discomfort. We all use each other. We seek comfort, insight, laughter, and love. We enter each other's lives with needs. The line is not in the using, it's in the intention. Mutual exchange is sacred. Manipulation is sin. It taught me to be honest about what I seek in people and what I offer in return. Not to pretend I don't need anyone, but to make sure my needs don't turn into demands. Another lesson, sharper than the rest, taught me a kind of sacred selfishness. You are allowed to put yourself first, even if it disappoints others. This one felt like betrayal, but it was only betrayal to the version of me that had been trained to please. To the version of me that thought being loved meant being available, always. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's an obligation, and obligation is the slow death of joy. I realized that every time I said yes to someone else, I was saying no to a part of myself. So I flipped the pattern. I said yes to myself first, and the world didn't collapse. It just got quieter, softer, more honest. Some truths wore armor when they arrived. They didn't ask for approval. They demanded recognition. One of them struck deep. You teach people how to treat you. I had been teaching people that my time was disposable, that my forgiveness was unlimited, that I would bend until I broke, just to keep the peace. And so they learned to expect it, until I unlearned my own lesson and taught them a new one. I stopped answering every call, stopped showing up when it cost me my sanity, stopped rewarding bad behavior with more chances. And slowly, I watched the world adjust, because the truth is, We train the people around us not with our words, but with what we allow, what we tolerate, what we repeat. These lessons may sound cruel, but they are not. They're boundaries dressed as warnings. They're wisdom without sugar. They didn't harden me. They clarified me. They made me more honest, more grounded, more alive. And just when I thought I had learned enough, life whispered something even deeper, not just about others, but about myself. A truth I had avoided for years. A reflection I could no longer run from. The next lesson wasn't about who I let in or who I pushed away. It was about who I had become when no one was watching. And that was the hardest one yet. The hardest truth to face is the one that turns inward, because it's easier to point outward, to blame, to defend, to retreat. But eventually, the noise around you fades, and you're left with a quieter question. Who am I when no one is watching? After drawing my boundaries, after letting go of the people who couldn't meet me in honesty, I was left with something unexpected. Space. Space between the person I had been and the one I was becoming. Space to observe the patterns I had built, not just in others, but in myself. And it was in that space that the real confrontation began. I saw that many of the toxic lessons I had adopted were not just survival strategies. They were mirrors. They reflected parts of me I had long denied. My desire to be needed, my fear of being alone, my hunger to be seen as good, even at the cost of my truth. I had blamed the world for asking too much of me, but I was the one who kept offering too much, hoping to be chosen in return. I wasn't just a victim of other people's selfishness. I was addicted to overgiving because it made me feel worthy. It's a subtle form of self-betrayal. To give in order to be valued, to love in order to be loved back, and then call it generosity. But true generosity doesn't come from emptiness. It flows from overflow, and I was running on fumes. So I began the real work, not of setting boundaries with others, but with myself. I stopped performing for validation, stopped chasing people who were content to watch me suffer, stopped dressing up my wounds as wisdom. Instead, I asked harder questions. Why do I fear stillness? Why does solitude feel like punishment? Why do I tolerate less than I deserve? The answers didn't come quickly, but they came, and each one stripped away a layer of illusion. I had mistaken busyness for importance, people pleasing for love, and self-neglect for strength. No more. There's a kind of grief that comes with waking up. You grieve the years you spent asleep. You grieve the version of you that tolerated too much, expected too little, and confused pain for purpose. But that grief is sacred. It means you're no longer numb. It means you're beginning to choose yourself, not just in theory, but in action. That's when a deeper lesson surfaced, one that didn't sound toxic at all, but that still rattled everything inside me. You are responsible for your own healing. Not your parents, not your partner, not your past. At first, it felt unfair. Why should I carry the weight of wounds I didn't create? But then I realized carrying them wasn't the same as healing them. Yes, people hurt me. Yes, some things should never have happened. But I could either remain a home for old pain or become a sanctuary for my own rebirth. Healing is not about erasing the past. It's about no longer building your future from its ruins. So I began to rebuild, slowly, tenderly, with intention. I started honoring my truth, even when it made others uncomfortable. I learned that wholeness isn't the absence of wounds, but the presence of self-compassion. I stopped romanticizing struggle, stopped wearing exhaustion like a badge, stopped thinking that breaking myself in half was the only way to be loved whole. I chose rest. I chose silence. I chose to say no without apology. And the more I chose myself, the more I met people who didn't see that as a threat, but as a mirror of their own strength. People who didn't ask me to shrink, didn't punish my peace, didn't flinch when I showed them my full, unfiltered self. It took losing almost everything I thought I needed to find what I actually did. I thought these lessons would isolate me, that I would end up cold, distant, hardened, but the opposite happened. I softened, because I was no longer pretending. I opened, because I finally felt safe in my own presence. I loved deeper, because I was no longer desperate to be loved back. There's a quiet kind of confidence that comes when you've walked through your own darkness and refused to let it define you. Not the kind that needs attention or praise, but the kind that stands alone in the silence and still feels whole. I used to think strength looked like endurance. Now I know it looks like discernment. Knowing what to keep, what to release, what to never invite back in. These toxic lessons weren't about bitterness. They were about balance, not about building walls, but knowing where the door should be and who deserves to walk through it. And now, standing on the other side of all I've let go, I carry one final truth before I close this chapter. The most painful lessons often disguise the most powerful awakenings, and the freedom they bring is worth every scar they leave behind. The irony of growth is that it rarely feels like growth when you're in it. It feels like a loss, like endings disguised as beginnings, like being torn open again and again until the truth finally has enough room to breathe. You don't wake up one day enlightened. You wake up with tired eyes and a quieter heart, and you realize you're no longer trying to become someone else. You're just finally becoming yourself. The world taught me to be agreeable, polished, predictable, but the most profound peace I've ever known came when I let go of being good and chose to be real instead. Realness has texture, it has edges, and sometimes it cuts the people who only loved your softness. But it also draws in the ones who love you in full color, flaws, fire, and all. I used to keep a list in my head of all the things I wasn't allowed to be. Too distant, too confident, too honest, too much. But that list was written by people who were threatened by their own reflection. So I stopped editing myself to make others comfortable. I stopped apologizing for the space I took up. And slowly, I reclaimed every part of me I once buried just to belong. These so-called toxic lessons, these boundaries, truths, and revelations, they weren't about closing off. They were about coming home, home to the self that had always been there, waiting to be chosen. Not the curated self, not the approved self, but the raw, unfiltered truth of who I am. The final lesson, perhaps the most sacred one, was this: your life is not a democracy. Not everyone gets a vote. Not every opinion deserves weight. Not every voice deserves an answer. We spend so much time trying to be understood, trying to make people see our hearts, our intentions, our pain. But understanding is a gift, not a right. And peace is not found in being seen by everyone. It's found in being seen by the right ones, and by seeing yourself most of all. There's a quiet courage in no longer needing validation, in loving yourself enough to let the wrong people leave, and trusting that the right ones will never require you to betray yourself. You become magnetic not by forcing connection, but by being rooted so deeply in your truth that only those who resonate can reach you. Every lesson I once feared would make me bitter instead made me whole. I didn't lose my softness. I just learned where to place it. I didn't lose my love. I just stopped offering it to those who saw it as weakness. I didn't become colder, I became clearer. And now, looking back, I realize I didn't learn 100 toxic lessons. I unlearned 100 lies that kept me small. Lie, you must always be available. Truth, your time is sacred. Lie, you must forgive to find peace. Truth, sometimes peace means letting go without closure. Lie, you must make everyone happy. Truth, some people will resent your happiness, no matter what you do. Lie, you are only as worthy as what you give. Truth, you were worthy before you gave anything. And so I learned, slowly, painfully, beautifully, that self-respect is not arrogance, that solitude is not loneliness, that detachment is not cruelty. I stopped chasing closure from people who never gave me clarity, stopped expecting apologies from those who rewrote the story in their favor, stopped waiting for others to validate the pain I already knew was real. And in doing so, I set myself free, free from performance, free from guilt, free from the myth that being broken is the only way to be loved. Now, I live differently. I speak when I have something true to say. I walk away when peace is no longer in the room. I protect my energy like it's sacred, because it is. The world might still call these lessons toxic, but I've lived them, I've bled for them, I've healed through them. And if they bring me back to myself, if they help me love with honesty, give with discernment, live with clarity, then let them be misunderstood. Because I've come to understand something much deeper. What's seen as toxic to the world is often what's most true to the soul. So if you too are unlearning the noise, if you're shedding what no longer fits, if you're choosing yourself after years of forgetting you're not alone, this is the work. This is the healing. This is the life that waits on the other side of pretending. And it's yours, fully, unapologetically, eternally, the moment you decide you are no longer for sale. You are no longer waiting. You are no longer becoming. You are.